All right, I have finally taken the time to finish Act 2 and move on to Act 3. You can see in the footage here that I did beat Act 2, that I am playing Act 3 now. So I have a little bit more perspective as to playing the Silksong experience. And this is going to be a really interesting video because there is quite a lot to say about this, but my feelings about Silksong, for the most part, are completely unchanged. I think the first two acts are boring. I think the world is lousy. I don't think they do a good job building up the setting or the characters or the overarching plot. I think getting to Act 3 is incredibly tedious and boring. The Citadel is an awful location. There's just there's just so much to complain about when it comes to this game. However, and I do want to emphasize this a lot, Act 3 is by far the best part of the game so far. Like, I was really surprised starting up Act 3 for the first time and seeing just how radically different it is from the first two acts. Because the first two acts, the problem with them is that they're so boring and stale and derivative and don't really feel like all that much different from the original game. It feels like the game is unfocused. It doesn't have a lot of things going for it. Like, it doesn't really do a good job building anything up or like having real stakes. Act 3 is not like that. Like, right from the get-go, you're introduced to this interesting idea of being rused by your allies in doing something incredibly stupid, essentially utilizing Void to destroy the final boss, to capture the final boss, and doing this completely throws the kingdom into chaos. You know, every town is destroyed. A lot of your friends are dead. Like, things are going to shit, and only you have the know-how and the ability to understand, like, not only what happened, but how you could potentially fix it. So the game actually feels as if there's an actual conflict, as if there are actual stakes. And I found myself surprised, at just how well written it was and how engaging it was and just how interesting the characters were all of a sudden, because none of them were good in the first two acts. None of them did a whole lot to really leave much of an impression on you or do anything or really have any reason to exist. But in Act 3, suddenly everything just kind of comes together. Suddenly, you just have unique character motivations. You have unique things happening. Like, not only just with the main plot, but in regards to like random places all over the world. You know, plenty of locations are destroyed now. A lot of your safe havens are no longer safe, and just it feels as if things have properly escalated. It is really, really interesting. I have quite a long ways to go until I finish Act 3, so I don't necessarily know if my feelings on this will change, but at this point, this is the most invested I've been in Silksong. There's been a lot of interesting boss fights. There's been a lot of interesting scenarios, lore changes, tie-ins to the first game, right? Which was a major complaint I've had with this game up to this point. Uh, I like character turns. You know, there's interesting new locations, crazy new power-ups, right? There's so much good to say about Act 3 that I'm honestly kind of shocked about it, especially because I gave the game a negative review already. And that is my issue with this. That is my problem. Like, Act 3 is great so far, but it really needs to be explained, understood, that the first two acts are still garbage. They don't have interesting world building. They don't get you invested in the setting. They don't get you invested in what's going on. They are bloated. They are boring. They don't have a lot of good things going for them. They feel tedious to play. Act 1 and especially Act 2 just feel just horrendously over-designed, padded, and just uninspired. And I do think it's safe to say, like, what exactly happened here in development? What took Team Cherry so long to put this out? Because it does feel like it is the first two-thirds of the game that's padded, that's bloated, that's way too much, that isn't well designed, that's just over designed in a lot of ways. Like, the first two acts just don't feel as if they're necessary. I feel as if the game was 20 hours shorter if you got through the first two acts in 20 hours or so and had way more interesting environments going up to the Citadel, got through the Citadel immediately, and then, like, had the option to immediately trigger Act 3. The game would have been a lot better paced and would have been a lot better for it. And I do think this is a problem with Silksong in general, is that it's not truly 60 hours of content, because all you're doing in these games is walking around corridors trying to figure out where you're supposed to go next. The game just gives you very little direction, very little idea of what you're supposed to do, and as a result of that, you end up getting lost near constantly. Once you know what you're doing, the game becomes trivialized. In the first two acts, all you really need to do to progress is just explore an area until you find a boss and then move on to the next area. There is very little to actually find or discover in Silksong. The game has a pacing problem. There is no reason for this to be 60 hours. There is no reason for Act 2 to even exist. Everything is set up in Act 1, and then Act 3 pays it off. There is no reason for Act 2 to even exist, and Act 1 should have been way higher quality, with way more interesting character moments, with a better setup, more interesting world, and just better pacing. I think what happened in development is that Team Cherry came up with the initial concept of the kingdom just getting completely ruined because of the void. They came up with the initial concept, and they were expanded the game so much that the pacing just completely ruins the entire experience, because it's Act 3 that feels like the plot actually gets starting. It's Act 3 that actually feels relevant to the overarching ideas and themes of Hollow Knight. It feels like Act 3 is what's when the game actually starts. Like, Act 1 and Act 2, in a lot of ways, feel completely pointless. There is way too much going on in Act 1 and Act 2 that feels as if it doesn't need to be there. It doesn't add anything, and it's just there to pad the game out and waste your time. I spent over about 10 hours, well, technically more than that, but like about 10 hours doing all the quests and exploring the world so I can unlock Act 3. Like, I don't understand why I had to do that, because it wasn't something that was built up in the game. It wasn't something that you uncovered by exploring or like figuring things out on your own. No. You figure out how to trigger Act 3 by talking to a random NPC after doing a whole lot of unrelated things, and then he just suggests to you about about taking out the boss in a different way, right? What happens because of that is Kino. What happens because of that is interesting, but just the idea that this random dude is just randomly going to do something like to fix this problem is just it's just not well handled. It doesn't feel organic. It does feel very forced. It does feel as if the final boss in general just doesn't really live up to the hype and like the potential of that this game was supposed to live up to. Like, there was Like, it just feels as if Team Cherry didn't understand what makes the Castlevania format work. Because when you play Symphony of the Night, when you play Aria of Sorrow, when you play Dawn of Sorrow, like, you have the tools to beat the fake final boss on you, right? Like, if you explore the map enough, you're going to find some kind of item, you're going to be given exposition, you're going to have, a clear idea of what you're supposed to do. And then you have to go out and do it, right? So when you fight the sorcerer Shaft in Symphony of the Night, you need to have a specific item to find the spirit possessing Richter. So like, when you beat the fake final boss, you realize immediately that something is wrong and that you have to like figure out what exactly is happening. And the game gives you the tools to do that. Aria of Sorrow does the same thing. If you explore enough of the map, you will figure out what you're supposed to do. It's complicated. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but you are given the tools to figure it out on your own, and you have to commit to it. In Silksong, you are completely at the mercy of an NPC who, for whatever reason, refuses to help you until you do a bunch of unrelated tasks that don't really tie into the overarching plot in any way. It just feels completely pointless. Like, for example, he doesn't even post the request to meet him on the wish board in the city he's in. He does it in Bellheart. Like I said on stream, just how ridiculous that is. Like, how did he do that? Like, did he leave the first shrine to go down there and just post about this in Bellheart? Like, what's the point? Like, does he even know you've been to Bellheart, that you own a home there? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. I think it's very clear that the bulk of Team Cherry's writing and character moments happen in Act 3. I feel like that's when everything actually comes together and the characters actually start being interesting, and there's some fun set pieces and some things that tie into the original game. Like, Act 3 is so much higher quality than the rest of the game in that regard. It's really not even funny. But as someone who loves the original Hollow Knight, like, I have to ask, why did I have to suffer through 40 hours of boring, monotonous nonsense to get to this point? Why exactly did I have to spend 40 hours grinding rosaries, doing every single wish imaginable, like exploring every corner of the map, so some guy could just do something? It just doesn't make any sense. Like, it just doesn't feel as if this was handled as well as it should have been. I think the original Hollow Knight, which also wasn't all that well handled, I think that was better than this. I think simply having a second phase to the final boss is a way more well thought out concept, because Hollow Knight was a better paced game. It had better structure. It didn't have this end of the world plot in Act 3. Like, Silksong feels almost as if it was conceptualized for this. For Act 3. And a lot of people aren't going to see this. They aren't going to know it exists, and they're not going to grind through it. I imagine that, like, for the majority of the players, myself included, like, most people are going to stop after Act 2. I myself had every intention of stopping after Act 2 because I hated the first two acts so much. And honestly, even though I'm enjoying Act 3, I feel as if it's not really worth playing, because if the game isn't good all the way through, why would I bother playing it? If the first two acts are as painful to play as they are, like, even if the last third is genuinely well made and interesting, it really does come off as too little too late. In fact, as I progress through Act 3, I'm kind of shocked at how little some of the areas in the world have changed. There are plenty of changes in some major locations, but a good chunk of the map is pretty much identical, maybe with some different enemy placements. And there's some more powerful enemies, but generally speaking, the world in Silksong is relatively unchanged. If anything, I feel almost as if Act 3 is too ambitious. I feel like they needed to spend a lot more dev time in making Acts 1 and 2 better paced, have better bosses, better structure, like more interesting characters, instead of just like wasting your time for 40 hours until you get to the ending where the plot actually starts happening. Like this was a complete waste of my time. Like I hated Acts 1 and Act 2 so much that I honestly don't think I'll ever play the game ever again. But Act 3 does have quite a lot of redeeming qualities to it. So it's a weird conundrum, one that I don't think I've ever really experienced before, that the last third of the game is significantly higher quality than the rest of it. And it's it's difficult, praising the game for things it does very late in the game because, well, does that redeem what happened before? Does it fix all the problems that came in Act 1 and Act 2? No. In fact, like the core gameplay problems of Silksong persist in Act 3. Like it's still not very fun to play. There's the areas still aren't that interesting. Like there's so much you can continue to say about the overall experience. However, it can't be denied that the core issue of Act 1 and 2, the fact that the world wasn't interesting, the story wasn't well told, there wasn't really a whole lot going on, that's no longer an issue in Act 3. Like, it actually feels like things are actually happening. I feel as if this is a really good example of a game just not knowing when to begin. I feel as if Team Cherry needed Act 3 to happen a lot sooner after a lot fewer, more well designed areas that are actually fun to play. I feel like Silksong doesn't have well thought out mechanics. I think it doesn't have well thought out enemy or boss design. I feel as if it's not very much fun to play. Like they should have spent more time making the actual experience better as opposed to padding it out with blow and filler. At this stage, I imagine Act 3 is going to fall off hard and lead to a very unsatisfying conclusion. But the opening segments were really interesting, and I did really enjoy the world building and the character moments and the changes from Act 2. But I can't imagine that it's going to be able to keep up this quality all throughout. I'm already starting to feel as if I'm wandering around the world again, trying to figure out what to do, just like I was doing in Act Two. So the core problem of Silk Song remains. Whatever qualities that Act Three may possess, it still fundamentally is attached to a very uninspired, derivative, boring video game.